worship through the eyes of the Jewish faith. We are very honored to welcome Rabbi Dovid Hazdan of the Great Park Synagogue. Rabbi Hazdan is a board member of Africa Tikkun, an organization I know very well. It's a Jewish outreach organization that addresses the plight of the previously disadvantaged here in our country, South Africa. Rabbi Hazdan will anchor this discussion for us into conversation with both myself and the president of our organization, Mr. Herman Mashaba. We will discuss the place and value of ethics in our contemporary world and how a nation such as ours goes about negotiating a shared ethical code. We think that this is really important, and this is the purpose of having hosted these 4 webinars to date. This webinar takes the shape of a roundtable dialogue to allow all of us who are present here today to ask one another questions, should we each of us wish to do so. The viewers who may be watching and joining us this evening, should you wish to pose any questions, you can do so using the chat function. Any members of the media who are joining us this evening, a high-resolution recording of these proceedings can be made available upon request. It is my honor to welcome now to the podium the president of Action SA, who's also the convener of this webinar series, Mr. Herman Mashaba, to kick us off by delivering his opening remarks. Mr. Mashaba, you are welcome, sir. Mr. Mashaba, please
Thank
unmute.
you very much, Lerato, and good evening to my fellows. Okay, sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself already. I have Lerato unmuted myself. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Lerato?
We can hear you clearly, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Lerato, once more, and good evening, my fellow joining this evening to this very important webinar. A special word of welcome to Rabbi Dovid Hazdan. Rabbi, we really appreciate you joining us this evening, and thank you to the Jewish community for allowing you to really be with us. This evening, fellow South Africans, we are concluding our series of webinars that have explored the concept of ethical leadership from the perspective of the major faiths in South Africa. Since we launched the series in February this year, we have engaged with Reverend S.C. Matebula, representing the Christian faith, followed by Maulana Abdul Khalik Ibrahim Ali, representing the Islamic faith. And last Thursday, we had Mr. Mukesh Patel, representing the Hindu faith. Tonight, we have the honor of engaging with Rabbi Hazdan, representing the Jewish faith. Rabbi, once again, thank you for joining us there. My fellow South Africans, we embarked on this webinars to demonstrate that despite the differences in our religious beliefs, concepts such as morality and ethical leadership transcend these differences. But it has been deeply inspiring to know the many commonalities in the discussions that have taken place over the past couple of weeks. I cannot emphasize this point enough. I firmly believe that when all is said and done, there's more that unites us as South Africans than there is that divides us. This is not something we should ever take for granted. In an environment where some people are doing their best to divide us and turn us amongst one another, we must always remember that the vast majority of South Africans want to see our country succeed and are willing to work together to make that happen. I maintain that there's nothing as powerful in this world that the moment when good people realize that they are the majority and stand together to change the course of history as one. I'm an internal optimistic person. I believe that hope is not lost on our country. Despite all the negativity, despite all the challenges we face, we can still build an inclusive and prosperous future for all our people, all South Africans. But to do this, we must rebuild a culture of ethical leadership that can put our country back on the right track. That is why Action SA has made ethical leadership one of our core values, because without ethical leadership dedicated to the service of our country, we will not make any progress. However, if we can succeed in fostering a culture of ethical leadership as a nation, I believe that South Africa can once again be a beacon of hope and prosperity. That is my objective and the objective of our party Action SA, to give South Africans hope for an inclusive, prosperous future. On that note, Lerato, I'd like to hand back to you to facilitate the rest of the discussion. And once more, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Mr. Mashaba, thank you very much for those opening remarks. I do want to make you aware that your internet connection does not seem to be as crisp as it usually is. Just in the meantime, if there's anything that you can do, we are seeing you freeze. We're losing your words. It is important. I know I'll capture them as we go along in the discussion, but just to make you aware that and I'm not sure if my colleague can get the same feedback. Rabbi Hazdan, I think he can also get the same feedback. I'll ask my colleague Anthony to see if there's anything we can do on that front, but we can continue on with the conversation. And with that, I would like to call Rabbi Hazdan to the floor now to give us his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Lerato. Thank you very much, Mr. Mashaba, and for your initiative to focus on the importance of ethical leadership in our country. It is vitally important. And I thank you for the opportunity for the Jewish community to participate in what has been an inclusion of different faiths. So often the faiths and the different faiths have differences in emphasis, in ideology, in thoughts. But I am positive that every single one of our faiths believes so deeply in the importance of ethical leadership and how it applies not only in the echelons of government, but how it applies in every element of leadership, which applies to families, and it applies to schools, and it applies to our very own self, our own being. We need to be leaders, and we need to be ethical leaders. And what I thought of doing is to trace the life of the greatest leader of our people, which goes back to biblical times. I want to trace the life of Moses and clearly important junctures in his life and how they, right from that beginning in biblical times, gave us the themes of ethical leadership. And firstly, just beginning with his very name, you know that the name Moses, Moshe, means to be drawn out, to be plucked out of the river, which was how he earned his name from the daughter of Pharaoh. He lived in a time in which the Jewish children were to be cast into the river. All Jewish boys were to be killed. And Moses was floating in a little basket that his mother put there, and he was plucked out of the jaws of death. But the word Moshe, which means to be plucked out, actually literally means something more in the Hebrew language. The word Moshe is actually a present continuous verb, which means not to be plucked out, but to be the one who plucks out. Because Moses, by definition, and in his very name, his identity, related to picking up those who had fallen around him. He himself emerged from such tragedy, and he dedicated his life to pick up anybody else whose life had encountered the pain of difficulty and loss. And moving to the very first event that we hear about him growing up, the verse tells us, Vayigdal Moshe vayetze lechav, and Moses grew up and he went out to his brothers. And interestingly, just 2 verses before that, it said that he grew up, the same word. So our commentaries explain that the second time it says that he grew up and he went out to his brothers is definitive. His growing up, his maturing, his mastering of life was the moment. What was the moment? The moment that he left the comfort of Pharaoh's palace and he went out to see what was happening with his brothers. That was the definitive moment of growing up. It's not 2 points. He grew up and he went out. He grew up when he went out to see the fate of his brothers who were slaves and going through such hard and difficult times. And the verse continues, Vayifen kovako, and he looked this way and he looked that way, Vayar ki ein ish, there was no man. And he saw a taskmaster smiting and hitting his brother. The commentaries explain, what do you mean there was no man? Not just that nobody was there. Sometimes when one is in an environment of evil and negativity and hurt, we look around and there is no man. There is no human being that is standing up for the dignity of others. Moses looked around him and said, where are the people? Where are the voices? Where's the influence that's going to make a difference in the lives of my brothers? And if there isn't, then I rise to the occasion. So the second point, besides the identity of Moses as one who lifts others, was that he definitively rose to maturity in the moment that he recognized that I need to take responsibility. So the second point about ethical leadership is being responsible. It is the pole opposite of what happens in the Garden of Eden at the start of the book of Genesis when the whole Torah begins. There we know that we made mistakes. When God came to Adam, he said, what did you do, Adam? What does Adam say? Don't speak to me. It's definitely not my fault. It was my wife. He goes to the wife, it was the snake. There is the abdication of responsibility and blame. And everyone thinks somebody else is responsible. Here Moses sees an event and he says, I am responsible. I have a mission. If nobody else is taking a stand, then I will take a stand. The third point about Moses' life is that he was a shepherd. And that gives us the background of the power of leadership and ethical leadership. We think that the power of leadership has to be honed specifically in the political world, specifically in the world of maybe military leadership, power, strength. That's where leaders come from. And in the Bible, we are told time and time again that the major leaders, including King David, who was overlooked because he was just a shepherd boy. What does a shepherd know? Moses was a shepherd when God tapped him on the shoulder and said, I want you as my leader. Because a shepherd is somebody who cares. A shepherd who knows every single one of his flock. He knows the needs, he knows what's important, and he tends to, and he cares. And the most important ingredient of a leader is to really care. It matters to me. A shepherd rather than some powerful military leader. We can add the acumen of the importance of being astute in politics and having the ability to lead in different directions. But the important ingredient that we start with is to care, and to care for each and every one of our flock. The fourth point that happens to Moses is that he comes across a burning bush. God says to him, take your shoes off because the place in which you're standing is holy. And I want you to go to Egypt and I want you to be the leader. What is Moses' initial reaction? Moses' initial reaction, he says, no, mi anochi, who am I? I'm going to be a leader. Moses sees himself as this humble human being. How can you, God, think that it is I? The opposite of what happens in the normal political arena of leadership. Everyone is saying that I am the greatest, I am the most important. Look at me, look at my strength. Look at all the campaigns of political leaders around the world. Not all, but the vast majority. It is about how good I am. I am the person who can take on all the problems of the world. The very fact that Moses says to God, Mi anochi, who am I? And then he continues to describe, I have defects. I have a speech impediment. How does a leader talk and present the case if I don't have the ability? I have the physical inabilities. And God says, Moses, that's not what determines a leader. It's not a glib tongue. It's not showmanship. It's not first impressions. It's not standing on the arena and sweeping people off your feet because you have a sharp tongue. And yet you have the beautiful words with which you can describe. It is the importance of communicating from your heart. I want somebody who doesn't have that eloquence of speech so that we know that that's not what leadership is about. It's not about glib statements. And look at how many leaders in the Bible, like Jacob, who limped. He had a walking impediment. Isaac was blind. And all of this is telling us that if you want to know what a leader is, don't look at the score that they get on the track or how they're going to score in terms of their overall. It's about the essential ingredients of leaders, and look past what is the external and look at where the message is coming from. And that was the interaction with Moses then. We then have Jethro. Jethro arrives and he says to Moses, you're not going to cope by leading alone. You have to have a system of delegation. And he spells out what are the ingredients of a leader. This is what his father-in-law Jethro says to him. I want capable people, God-fearing people, people of truth, people who hate dishonest gain. That it's not about how much I'm going to grow personally from this leadership. They hate dishonest gain. Those were the ingredients given to Moses as to how to appoint leaders. And certainly the ingredients that we have to follow in wanting to have leaders ourselves. The next point in Moses' life is that his people fail. He's up on the mountain, he's coming down with the 10 commandments, and the Jewish people around the mountain are distracted, they're fearful that Moses might never come, and they create a golden calf. And they dance around the golden calf, and they say, Ele Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God Israel who took you out of Egypt. Can you imagine the impact of failure? So soon after the miracles of the Exodus, they exchange God for the golden calf. And God says, I am fed up. Moses, I will build a new people from you. I'm fed up with this people. Let them go, and I will start up a new people from you. And Moses' response when his people failed, he turns to God and he says, forgive my people. Ve'im ayin, and if you do not, wipe me out of your book, God, as much as I love your holy words. Remove me from your book if my people are not able to be forgiven. It's not about me. It's about my people. If I do not have my flock, I'm no longer a shepherd. Don't think of me being the new emergence of a people. It's not about me. Can you imagine leadership that says it's about the people? It's about the human beings, even when they fail. I believe in them. I will lift them. I will put myself aside in order to allow my people to flourish. And then I would like to speak about the next stage of Moses' impact as an ethical leader. We, in fact, read it in our synagogues this particular Saturday. When he finishes the collection for the sanctuary, and everyone gave their gold and silver and copper and all of their wealth, he does an accounting, a very thorough accounting. And it's described how he does that accounting in public. Exactly how much gold, how much silver, where was it used, how was it used, where did it go? Every last cent. And our commentaries in the Talmud say, did anyone suspect that Moses would have taken 1 grain of silver for himself? Nobody suspected that. But it's that you shouldn't be seen by anybody. There shouldn't even be the element of suspicion. Nobody should cross their minds that leaders have their fingers in the cookie jar. And from this particular section that we read this Sabbath in our synagogues, we learn that if a person is a collector of communal funds, you may never count that money, you may never touch that money, you may never be involved with that finance without a group of people, never alone. It then continues in very subtle areas that if you are in charge of funds, you may not exchange funds. You can't change these funds for those funds, or change for foreign currency, or change bigger bills into smaller bills. Don't touch the money unless there are people around watching. Every single move. We are taught that when the priest went into the sanctuary where there was finance, he could not have pockets, he could not wear shoes, he could not hold any bag. He went in, there was not one possible place to put any penny, not because they didn't trust him. They didn't want anybody to say, maybe, not even the thought. That is how integrity, honesty in accounting is essential in ethical leadership. Every cent, every single day. And the penultimate point I want to take from Moses' life is that there was no cronyism. And we see that when it came to the time of succession, when he turns to God and he says, God, you've not allowed me to go to the promised land. This is the end of my career. Please, God, set up a leader who will go out in front of my people and who will enter before my people, so that my people will not be katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh, like a flock that has no shepherd. Moses had children. Moses had influence. Moses turned to God and said, the leader of the next generation is not anything but the best person who is able to lead my people. That is the only criteria. That is what we need and require. It's not about party, and it's not about family, and it's not about the influence of whom I know or don't. I don't want my people to be a flock without a leader, without a shepherd. That's the criteria. Absolutely no other element enters into who is the leader. And the final point that I want to make is the last 30 days of Moses' life. The last 30 days of Moses' life, he says the whole book of Deuteronomy. He talks to a new generation. He's no longer talking to the generation that came from Egypt. They all died in the desert. He's now talking to a whole new generation, the children, the people who are going to inhabit the promised land. It's a new world. It's a new era. It's not the people who felt the suffering of the taskmasters on their backs. This is a new generation who were born in the desert with miracles all around them. And Moses turns and changes and becomes the teacher and the visionary, the person who is able to look forward and say, this is what we want to achieve. This is the mission. This is who you are. This is your task. This is your responsibility. This is your privilege to be a people of God and to influence the world positively. And one of my famous writers that I really love and embrace, and we all know him through a beautiful book called The Little Prince. When we think of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he taught us lots of things. But this quote, which I thought relates to this vision of looking ahead, and this is what he said about a leader and vision. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people together to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work. Don't. But teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. Teach them to dream. Teach them to have hope. Teach them to have optimism, as you mentioned before, Mr. Mashaba, to live in this world with hope. Teach them to think of what we can achieve and accomplish. It's not about the tasks which we need to learn what to do, but don't break it down into a detail before you're able to give the vision of what we want to achieve. That is, in a nutshell, the 120 years of Moses' life and why he's still called in the Jewish faith, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. He teaches me and he teaches every one of my brethren, and in fact, humanity in the world, how to live our lives. That is in theory, and perhaps the discussion will lead to some of the practical things that we can do in our lives today to achieve some of these very lofty and beautiful goals.
Wow. You took the words right out of my mouth, because I'm thinking practically. I'm thinking today, 2021, how do you do that? Thank you so much, Rabbi, for those opening remarks. Mr. Mashaba, you're also, I can see your face. You are bubbling with a lot of the wisdom that has been shared with us a few minutes ago. Here's my kicker of a question. Biblically, the motif of a shepherd is used time and time again. And it intrigues me. And I would like for you, Rabbi, to unpack this for us. What is it? You mentioned caring, but why is the shepherd the most exemplary motif to use when we're talking about who we choose as people who potentially have the makings of ethical leaders?
So, Lorata, I think that the followers that are the sheep are not necessarily the followers in every leader's life. But what I wanted to emphasize, and what I think the Bible is emphasizing, is that simplicity of spirit and love and care. In fact, the Midrash, the teachings of our rabbis, describe that moment when Moses saw the burning bush, and he turned aside and he said, Asura naver, why is this burning bush burning and it's not being consumed? Why was he suddenly distant and far away at some burning bush? We actually say that he followed one of the sheep. He couldn't understand why it had separated itself from the rest of the flock, and he followed it until eventually it came to a brook of water. This is the Jewish tradition. And he saw that the sheep was thirsty, and he lifted the sheep. And he said, I didn't realize that you were thirsty. Let me help you drink. And he bore and he carried the sheep all the way back. For sure, a leader needs to have much, much more acumen to deal with the complexities of life. And there are many different complexities besides leading sheep. But the element at which the foundation on which every other talent is going to be honed has to be that sense of caring, of gentleness, of having time and having patience. That is the key, the foundation to all the other talents that have to be honed.
Thank you, Mr. Mashaba. I can see you want to come in.
Yeah, I just really want to really come in. I was really awed by the rabbi's the opening remarks, and I think actually bringing it to a practical life situation, giving us the life of Moses. I think for me, it's absolutely incredible. And please bear with me, Mulerato, from time to time if you think my network is not stable. Unfortunately, we're going through a load shedding, so I'm using my home system. And obviously, during a time like this, I definitely expect my internet system not to really be that accurate. So I really apologize for that. But I think what the rabbi has really shared with us really extremely powerful, giving an example of Moses as a leader, and really giving us the qualities and the characteristics of the leader. But then, Rabbi, if I look at the world today, and I think let me bring it closer to home. With all this that is there, the Bible has been there. There's been a lot written about Moses, and there's been religious leaders teaching human beings to actually live this kind of life. Because I remember in your opening remarks, it's not just really about the leaders, it's about us as individuals, it's about our families, it's about what happens in schools and so forth. What really went wrong? Because if I look at my country today, we started suffering from moral degeneration like some 20 years ago into our new democracy. What, in your view, you think actually went wrong for us actually to really miss this kind of morality and values?
Thank you, Herman. I'd like to share a quick story that, to me, crystallized where degeneration can begin. About 20 years ago, I hiked the Grand Canyon in America. I also hiked it about 5 years ago, and it seemed to grow very tall in 15 years. It was much harder the second time. But I was driving the first time when the highway went actually over the dam wall, the Hoover Dam wall, on the way to the Grand Canyon from California. And it was through the desert, and there were these wide roads that went flat. You could land a jumbo jet on those highways because it was just flat and straight. And the signs on the side of the road kept saying, dangerous highway, use your lights, dangerous highway. So when I came to the wall of the Hoover Dam and there was a policeman, I said, please help me, I'm a lost South African. Explain to me how this could be a dangerous highway. It's the best highway in the world. And he said to me something which I used as my sermon when I returned to South Africa. He said, young man, I was at the time, this is a highway where people fall asleep at the wheel. One of the most dangerous elements in society is when we become complacent, we become conditioned by what seems to be a new successful era, and we stop thinking, we stop yearning, and we stop fighting for values. That is when we fall asleep at the wheel. It's precisely the curves and the turns and the roundabouts and the ups and downs that keeps us focused, that we know that we have to watch the road. And one of the turning points when a society starts degenerating is when we lose that initial impetus of we want change, we want a better world, we want to be free, we want South Africa to be a united community. We don't want to have the evils of our past. We were driven by the pain and the difficulty. And somehow when we left that behind and we moved into a euphoric new future, we stopped thinking, or many people stopped thinking. And we moved into a realm of what can I take from this rather than what can I give to make a difference. And I don't know if that answers part of the question, but I think that's where the mistake begins, when we stop yearning and we stop having the vision that drove us in the first place to want to change.
Unbelievable, incredible, Rabbi, by always giving practical, easy examples, for us to consume and understand. And I think I remember, I'm sure, Lerato, you must have listened to me on many occasions, and I've written about it, and I've had an opportunity to address audiences, many parts of the world. And my view has always been, my personal view is that things really went wrong in this country because the miracle that happened in 1994, unexpected, because we grew up, I personally grew up, I never thought I'll ever see a peaceful transition in my country. And all of a sudden we had this miracle. We became a great nation. We became the envy of the world. And I think what happened, we all went to bed. We all went to sleep. We're thinking, you know what, this is a beautiful country, this is the best in the world. That is why we end up right now with the difficulties we are facing. Look at what happened in 2019 national elections. 18.6 million South Africans did not show up to vote. And they did not show up to vote because they disappointed with the system, because obviously they are still under impression the euphoria of 1994 still exists with them. They don't realize that life is a complex place, and it evolves, and it needs us to be vigilant as human beings at all times. And I think it's really, you used this analogy. For me, it's so practical. And I've been on that freeway before going to the Grand Canyon. So my wife and I driving. You get, I mean, here is this massive road. And I was actually wondering where when people say this is dangerous, and I think you've really put it so well. And thank you so much for sharing and making it practical for us. And I hope that South Africans actually can learn from this. Lerato, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mashaba. Rabbi, I'm thinking about when you opened and we spoke about the Israel coming out of Egypt, right? And I want to be fair, and I want to be kind and compassionate to South Africa, to say we're not the first to fall asleep at the wheel, right? We come out of apartheid. Israel came out of Egypt. They were in the wilderness. Is it 40 years? In just wandering about, falling asleep at the wheel. Is this human nature? Is it human nature to kind of, just have struggle fatigue? We struggled too long. We're tired. Can somebody else struggle, or can I get my time? Can I get relief and reprieve from this moment? And is that possibly why we then get into this mode of what can I take as opposed to what can I contribute?
Yes, Lerato, and I think, look at us in COVID now. We all have fatigue and we're tired of masks and staying in. But we need to go the journey. We need to be able to keep ourselves strong through the journey. And I believe that the desire to have central leaders, the top leaders of the country who have integrity, is a wonderful goal. And if we would care, we would vote, and we would make sure that our voices are counted. But I think we have to bring it much closer to home. There are many areas that leadership can be honed that is much, much closer to the house where we live. And I might have mentioned to you, I think in our communicating, that in 1998, I'm the dean of the school, the Torah Academy, which is a Jewish day school here in Johannesburg. In 1998, we launched a program called Psychalive. At the time, it was impossible to even have a combined effort between a white school in the northern suburbs and a school in Soweto. I actually went through the Interfaith Commission, a man by the name of Ishmael Nkubela, and he put us in touch with a man called Mr. Zimba, who is a dear friend, who was the principal of a school in Soweto. And we began a project which has kids of grade 11 age cycling from Johannesburg to Durban over 5 days. And we ran it, except for the last year because of COVID, every single year. It's an annual event, grade 11 students. And I've got students from Orange Farm and also students from Israel that come to learn about understanding and tolerance. And you could think, so it's only 50 kids or 50 young men. How much of an influence is that going to be to change the country? And I believe that we have to stop becoming paralyzed by imagining that unless we change the whole country, we're not going to change anything. Let us all start from an environment, from some place. Those 50 kids a year and their teachers and their families that have connected across cultures, across languages, and across religions. Those 5 days has been said to me by all the students who've been in it were the most valuable days of their 12 years of education. Because we went up the hills together, we cried together and we laughed together and we sang and learned each other's songs. By the end of the third day, we were singing in Sotho and we were singing in Hebrew. And we were learning about each other. And the fact that 6 years later, now, a few weeks ago, one of the students from Soweto called me to tell me that he's lost his mother to COVID. And he was crying and he said, Rabbi, I'm calling you. He didn't have to call me. He has many people in his life. Somehow we really connected, every single one of us. So if we at least start thinking about how we can connect with somebody and something in our neighborhood, in my school, in my class, in my community. Here are leaders of faiths. We could have faith leaders joining for the areas that we have one voice, no doubt. Every single faith believes in all of these tenets and all of these important things. And we do things that influence our communities to think about caring about the next person. We don't have to wait until we have the person in the supreme position of authority in leadership to be able to be the leader. What about me? What about the things that we can do in our schools to motivate that we want our children to be future leaders? Maybe we're giving the wrong message to our children. We're telling our children that we want them to be the wealthiest and the richest people, and that's going to make them successful and that's going to make them happy. I am overjoyed that each one of my children have gone into the field of either teaching, educating, or being involved with community work. That is the greatest joy of my life. It is not a career financial success. It is the success of knowing that life, you wake up in the morning and you can do something for somebody else. And the fact that it continues to the next generation is because it came from the generation before me. Yes, people can be fatigued. In a nutshell, my father was born in Russia in 1907. In the 20s, he escaped the border into Poland and into Latvia and lost his family to the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution. He lost his family in Russia. The rest of his family were butchered and killed in December of 1941 in Latvia when the Nazis mowed them down with guns. And he survived because he was in Sweden at the time, which was a neutral country. He had one person left in his life, which was a wife who needed a warm climate, and that's why they moved to South Africa, and I was born in warm baths, which he selected because his wife needed to be in a warm climate, and she died 6 months later. He'd lost every element of his life. He'd lost half the family to the Russian Revolution and half his family to the murderous Nazi regime. And he lost the last person in his life 6 months after arriving in South Africa, a man who spoke 9 languages, who had the education, who was in the hub of activities of saving people who had come out of the Holocaust. And what did he do? A few years later, he met my mother and he started a family. I was born when he was 51. He was a man of vision and passion and laughed and enjoyed and took us on vacations and holidays together. He taught us how to dream. He taught us not to be victims, not to look around and say, this is my lot and this is how sad it's been. And he had plenty to point at and to say, it's not fair. He taught our family to dream. And because of that, my sisters went into teaching and my children. That's how it continues. I'm saying we each and every one of us has an area and an environment of influence. And we have to influence that environment to think about service and caring, and that creates a chain of action that relates to ethical conduct. And we've got to start at home. We've got to start really close to where we are.
Ooh, you're energizing me, Rabbi. You are giving me so many nuggets for contemplation in my own life. I'm thinking about how to do this better. How can I make a better contribution to society? And that's really important. So thank you for that. You are the first faith-based leader we've had a conversation with to talk about accountability of resources in the way that you have articulated it, talking about that there should never be an element of suspicion. And as you were taking us through that remark, I'm thinking, how do we practically do this? I can imagine every, the Minister of Finance, walking into Treasury and there's no pockets, no shoes. I think the current Minister of Finance would be happy to walk barefoot into Treasury, might I add. How do we achieve this practically? How do we get to be able to select leaders who will be without reproach? What would South Africans have to do for that person to know that that is the standard that is required of them, of their occupation, of that role?
So I think, Loretta, there has to be an accountability when things go wrong. That we need to send a message to society that you cannot get away with robbing and stealing and coming out of the cookie jar, and nobody even asks any questions. If we stop asking the questions, then we have surrendered. We need to ask the questions and to pursue the issues, even if they're painful and even if they're difficult. I think that our Bible is replete with so many of the references of the mistakes of our people Israel. It doesn't write. Most history books talk about the wars that they won, and they were great, and everything was, they were victorious, and they lived happily ever after. They were the greatest people. We talk about all the warts and all the scars and all the difficulties because when we lift ourselves out of failure, we're stronger. We have a tradition that in the ark that housed the 10 Commandments, the second set that represented the fact that we had healed, we kept the broken pieces of the first tablets that were shattered on the mountain. Well, why would we keep the pieces of the first tablets that represent such failure? Because they precipitated the second and the starting over, and the fact that we were able to start anew. Failure can be the greatest teacher in life if we only respond to it appropriately. So the first thing for sure, if we're going to let our children know that we do not tolerate a substandard of integrity, and that we have accountability and there's a responsibility, and we have to face the music, and it starts with every little detail. It starts with the packets we throw out of the windows of our cars. It starts with the bribes that we give to somebody. It starts with all the little things. We have to all be accountable, and we have to teach that. So how does one get leaders? One has to cultivate the society that cares that we should have such leaders, because societies very often deserve the leaders that they get. Maybe we need to care more. It's about attitude. I would think that if society is going to impact with the importance of leadership, for example, we have to get a message out of who are our heroes, who are our superheroes, and who are our heroes. Our heroes are the people that crack the vaults, that are mega multi-billionaires, who are able to do whatever they want and that have the power to do whatever. Those become our superheroes. Heaven forfend, God forbid. We need to make our heroes the nurses and the teachers, the people who are not paid the salaries that they deserve. They have to become heroes. They have to be celebrated as heroes. We shouldn't look at them as the people who unfortunately can't do anything else. They wake up every morning and think about serving the next individual. So society has to somehow paint a picture that our real heroes are the people who are affecting change positively in this world. Not the image, not the media, not the fame, not the fortune, not the luxury items, not the untouchables, not the idols. You know, we had the idol of the golden calf. We have idols today, which comes in so many different forms. So these are things that schools have to teach about, that communities, that faith leaders have to talk about. What are our ultimate goals? What makes a person successful? And if we can tell our children that this nurse is in fact a greater success story than a billionaire, and really mean it, then we've been able to communicate to our children that that's the way that they should want to dedicate their lives. That's what they should dream of, serving.
Wow. Mr. Mashaba, you have a tough one, and I want to pose this one to you. I'm sorry. You have a question to ask. Can I ask you to hold on it, because I would like for the two of you to have a conversation about this one. The rabbi raised the issue of leaders, ethical leaders who are visionaries, who set up the vision for a nation to dream, to continually dream, never stop dreaming. Yes, we have a constitution, but never stop dreaming of how much better society could be as we ponder what we're going to leave behind for the next generation. Here's a kicker of a question for the both of you. You mentioned in the Little Prince, that you're talking about, don't give them, a bunch of wood. Don't give them the bunch of wood to build the ark, but have them realize, teach them to long for the majesty of the ocean. How do you begin that mentoring process where all you're asking for is simplicity in a world, in a generation, Mr. Mashaba? You have this task ahead of you. How must Mr. Mashaba do this when we are living in the project management world, where our leaders must be taskmasters and give us, different tasks and objectives to achieve all of the time? How do we merge those two worlds? Mr. Mashaba, I don't know if you remember that point, and I wonder if it jabbed you a little bit in any way. Any thoughts?
Lerato, what the rabbi has shared with us, it is so emotional, it is so real, and I think he's made his presentation so easy, because all the time it brings issues closer to home. That's why it hurts me as a person when you hear a situation where people are always looked down upon. And you remember a few years ago, our political leadership started hating what they call clever blacks. And I'm saying to myself, we should really be celebrating clever people, like exactly what Moses experienced, to teach people how to dream. You've got to encourage people to be the best they can be, because God has given us this little brain to really be able to navigate this difficult situation. But now once you start actually ostracizing people for calling them the clever blacks, I mean, it's such a profound way of actually pulling people down, instead of actually as a leader where you've got to actually celebrate clever people, because there's no way you can ever build a society without ever celebrating those who really come out and dream. And something, also for me that I took from this is also this whole issue of the abdication of our responsibilities. Because life is difficult. I think as a leader, you've got to make decisions, tough decisions. I'm sure, Lerato, you've worked with me now for some time, and people who've worked with me over the years, I always deliberately keep saying to people, I'm not in this job to make friends, but I value friendship. Because obviously, as a leader, how do you really satisfy everyone? Because once you start obviously operating on the basis of friendship instead of values, instead of integrity, that's when you begin to compromise yourself, and people will use you and abuse you. I think it's really so important, and that's something that I've learned throughout my life, that if I have to take decisions, as long as when I take those decisions, I take them in total good faith. Some people might not really like it, and I'm happy to really live with it. What I think for me it's important is to ensure that I act in total good faith. And also to what the rabbi brought that resonates with me is not to really allow other people to dictate my life. You know, I was born on my own, brought into this world for a purpose, for a reason. And in all of us, you can really come out there in this world blind or with no limbs and so forth. But ultimately, there's not a single human being of the 7 billion people of the world. All of us are here for a purpose. And I think if we can actually recognize that all of us are here in this world for a purpose and not really allow other people to dictate the type of life that you've really got to lead. And I think that's something that I always live by. And lastly, I think because Rabbi brought so many of this issue, where you don't really allow other people to set an agenda for you. You set your own agenda, you operate with other people. I've always accepted as a person that I'm incomplete. I'm incomplete. That is why I've always believed, I think I'd really take my life from the early age of 22 in the dark days of this country's history. When I went into business, and by the time I reached 24, I decided to really go into a formal, proper business, a manufacturing business. But I was a trader selling products from the boot of my car. So I was a trader, but I wanted to go into manufacturing. And I realized, you know what, Herman, for you to really be able to do what you have to really do, surround yourself with the like-minded South Africans or other people so that they can really complete you. I think for me as a leader, I always really believe it's important for you to surround yourself with other people who are going to complete you, because as a human being, I'm fallible. I make mistakes every day of my life because life is not perfect. This world is not perfect. And the only way you can perfect it is to ensure that you surround yourself with other people who are going to guide you, who are going to assist you in ensuring that when you make a decision, you are there guided by others. So I think to what the rabbi has really shared with us was really very powerful. To really always use this example of my grandfather. Probably him and rabbi comes from the same cloth, because these are things that my grandfather all the time insisted. You know, grew up thinking that my grandfather was unfair to me, because my grandfather's expectations of me were as I was young, I resisted them. I used to sometimes, if I had a way, to run away from him, because my grandfather, all the issues that Rabbi brought, my grandfather really expected the best out of me and made it show that this is not negotiable. So, Rabbi, thank you so much. I'm just totally incredible. I wish I could really keep Rabbi for the next 5 days and really get more South African.
You get tired of me, Herman.
Just, Rabbi, and thank you for your comments, Mr. Mashaba, and for sharing your story. We always say at the beginning of these webinars how quickly time passes. I cannot believe we have the number of minutes, literally 6 minutes left. Rabbi, in your view, just in closing, you know, we've put together these webinars so that we can begin to have a conversation around shared values. We've had the conversation now with the other 3 major faiths in our country, with the Jewish faith tonight being the 4th one. Just in a nutshell, what would you propose would be our shared values as a society across religious and faith lines, across color lines, you know, the idea of building a better society for all of South Africans to be able to enjoy equally?
Loretta, I think that you've already started a process, and I really thank Mr. Mashaba for having the insight and the courage to take an initiative to touch a subject which could be a raw wound, difficult to address. But look how each of the faiths has no doubt expressed very similar ideas and ideologies. These are the areas that so if we could start an initiative of volunteerism, of caring for, of outreach projects. It is the most empowering element in every situation. When people grieve loss and people have been through pain that you cannot turn around, you have to learn how to deal with it because it's irrevocable. They've lost a parent, they've lost a loved one. The most healing element, besides belief and many things that one's religion can bring, but the most empowering element is to plow one's grief into giving and into sharing. And if we could create a wave of kindness, of wanting to make this world a better place, that's what God wants of all of his children, to care for one another. And rather than using all of our energy to point fingers at all the others who have done wrong, which might be correct, but it could be wasted energy. If we use our energy to positively initiate projects and plans, like Africa Tikkun does and many other, I'm sure, religions have their project, they bind people, they connect people, they invest in the next human being. And Loretta, we do need to have some kind of positive vision. I'm sharing another, I didn't think of this until you were talking about how does one see a positive picture of the future. A number of years ago, there was security personnel that were doing a training session, and the training session involved walking on hot coal, on burning hot coal. Okay, I thought this is like mad. You get mad, and then there's exceptionally mad. And then they came to me and said, Rabbi, you can do it too. Okay, I said, this is not something I actually desired and wanted. But after 6 hours of training, and which included mainly in that focused time, was what does it look like to emerge on the other side? And you thought of cool, cold streams and this beautiful, idyllic situation of a beautiful garden with a stream in it. And you envisage the emergence on the other side. You actually paint the picture in your mind and you focus on it to such an extent that I cannot believe it. And the picture, I need the picture to remind me that actually happened, that we walked across this whole bed of coals, burning red hot coals. We didn't get burnt. And what it left for me, besides just the fun activity that I had with people, what it left for me was that if we focus on the goal, on the end point, if we're able to give the picture to our children, not just the taskmaster, you have to practice your music, take them to the symphony. You cannot say practice your art, take them to the art museum, let them see what comes out the other side when you practice. Let them see what a scientist can do so that they're able to concentrate in their studies. Don't blast them because they didn't attend school yesterday. Show them the picture of what can be on the other end. And we as parents can do that. As teachers and educators, we can do it. As community, faith, community leaders, we can do that. Let's show a picture that is optimistic and hopeful. And then work kindly, gently along one side another to achieve it.
Thank you so very much. We are hugely grateful. South Africa, I need not say anything further than what has been shared here this evening. If somebody were to say that we were having a political conversation, others would say, no, we were not. We were having another family meeting. This has been a year of lots and lots of family meetings. We appreciate that. But this is a political meeting. The apolitical is often very political because it affects and touches all of our lives. I want to just share with you, South Africa, to say that, you know, as we move forward as a nation in this conversation around reading ethical values, ethical leadership, ethical leaders in our societies, we must remember that all of us have shared values around humility, around what we want on the other side. We want people who are not stealing. We want people who are kind and caring, who love South Africa as a society, who love humanity as a society as well. I want to end off with this because I am so rushed for time. I cannot believe it, we're at the end, is to say that we are going to wrap up these conversations, put them together so that South Africa can see what these shared values are and not have these conversations in silos, but to put something together where South Africans can grab it and realize that actually it is very true that what binds us and what links us all, what makes us similar is very much the same, that we are connected as a collective more than we are on divisional lines. Those are imaginary, those can be overcome. We love you, South Africa. We thank you so much for having been with us. We thank you for having born with us and been with us for so long, for 4 weeks of these conversations. We really appreciate that. Rabbi, all of our guests, thank you so much for everything that you have done. Mr. Mashaba, thank you so much for the vision for us to have this conversation. It's been very, very important. And lastly, I want to remind South Africans, this is going to be a long journey for us to rebuild our nation. We're all committed, all hands are on deck. Please do communicate with us. You know, our website is www.actionsa.org.za. We love